is with InDesign, and I am actually going to open a couple of projects, a couple of files here, just to use an example. Okay, so let's say this is a relatively big layout. So if I'm looking at the size of this document setup, this is a 57 wide, 36-inch wide, tall, right? So it's kind of size for our plotter rolls, basically, right? 36 wide. It's a pretty big print, okay? Now, due to the nature of vector file formats, obviously, right? This file title is, it's only like 1 MB, right? It's like pretty small, right? Okay. Now, when you upload your digital, right, what we ask you to do is we ask you to export, which like this, right? And then you choose Adobe PDF. Typically for print, you choose the print sort of setting, okay? And I'm just going to use this title name. And you say yes, right? You get some settings. These are usually set to high quality print, right? Which is just for exporting, right? And you export and say, okay, it's done. And you should basically get something like this, right? As a PDF, okay? Now, for your plotters or for plotting, however, I think you'll find that some plotters will take PDFs, some won't. Some of them will take JPEGs, right? Now, the PDF file format itself is also pretty small. So you can see this P1 gallery title as a PDF was only 47 kilobytes. It's super small, right? But if I do the export as a JPEG, which in many cases you guys may have to do for it to work with your plotters. Okay, so I'm going to switch this file option to JPEG, save. You'll see that you get some options here with the image export. Okay, so I usually actually leave this quality to high if you have like photos and stuff, basically. You don't have to really change this too much. But the real thing is to change these two. Okay, this should be RGB by default because they're kind of assuming that as exporting as a JPEG, you're going to show it on the screen. So usually you will have to change this to CMYK because you're kind of going to expect to plot this. Okay, now if you have a version that you're going to save for like portfolio or whatever, then I would leave this as RGB basically. Okay. And then resolution, you can kind of experiment, but I'll just do both, right? At the very, very, very least, your resolution will want to be 150. If you're just going to show it on the screen, it might be 72. But for printing, at the very least, you want it to be 150, okay? And then we'll just say export. And you'll see we get a JPEG here. That's about 4 kilobytes, okay, 4 megabytes. Okay. Now this, because it's sort of printed at the size, this is a vector file format, right? So, it's a fairly big image size-wise, but because it's mostly the same color, so it's mostly blue, the JPEG format is able to kind of compress it, so it's fairly small. But if you have a much, much bigger, more elaborate or complicated sort of layout, then, the compression won't work as well, and it's likely you'll get a much larger file size, right? So if I try to do this export again, and just like overwrite it, with 300 export, and actually I think it will run a little bit. Actually, yeah, you'll see this come up when you're writing to larger files, the spinning wheel. Okay, so you see this file became 11 megabytes or so, somewhere around 11 and 12 megabytes. Okay, so just much larger, but much higher DPI because this is a 300 DPI image now. Okay. And so when I hover over it, you'll also see its pixel dimensions are 8550 by 5400, right? So it's a pretty big raster image. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of touch on that for you guys when you're eventually kind of exporting your layouts for printing. You will have to kind of contend with that. So another thing I get asked a fair bit about is actually the export settings for the PDF here. So here I have a setup that's basically kind of like similar to what you guys would have. Just the 3 pages. These are 24 by 36 if this was in inches, right? So this is the same size as what your exports would be like, right? And let's assume like, we tell you guys, yeah, if you have these sort of two, sheets side by side, you should use these two and not that first one, right? Because this is meant to be kind of like a cover page. And it's actually an option that you can uncheck in the sort of setup if you kind of don't want a cover page, but that's fine, right? You get this. So your content is really on 1 and 2, and you don't want 0, basically, okay? So if we do just like normal export, and I'm just exporting this to my, desktop. If you do all, right, basically as an export, PDF export, what you would get is basically that, right? 0, 1, and 2 as separate pages, right? And then you can obviously you can kind of change the page display options here. Like if you show cover page and 2-page view, then, and I also check 2-page view, right? So what you would get would sometimes be something like that. If you click it, then 0 would be the cover page, and then 1, 2 would be the 2 facing page. So this is kind of more ideal. You can always, right, go into, if you have Adobe Acrobat Pro, or like the I forgot what the name of the program is down in Circa, you can always come in here and just like delete that page from the document after the fact, just if you accidentally kind of exported, all 3 pages. Now, however, you can actually just do that as a setting when you export. I'm just going to use the same name, replace it, okay? And then just like basically pick the range of the pages that you want to export. So I'm actually here, instead of 1 to 3, I'm actually saying just pages 2 and 3, right? We're just exporting those 2, okay? And when you export, you can also decide whether or not you want to export these as spreads or not. If I export that spreads, it'll kind of actually join these two. So if I export it like that with the spreads sort of checkbox ticked, what I'm going to get is actually 1 and 2 side by side like this, and there's no sort of breaking seam down the center, right? Which, if your intent is actually kind of show this, together, right, side by side, this is actually not a bad option, but you may not be able to print it, right, with this way, because this would be kind of, much wider, or you would get kind of a long print. You have to kind of turn this, essentially rotate this clockwise, like you would have to print it this way, because the long dimension is what, 36, right, 24 by 36. So you could actually print it this way. So if that option is unchecked, so I'm going back to export, save Adobe PDF print, and unchecking the spread option, still doing range of 2 and 3, then what I'm getting is like this, 1 and 2 as individual spreads or individual pages, right? But I can still, when I'm going to my page display, I can still pull up 2-page view, uncheck the show cover page, and then this would still be kind of like similar with the sort of page break down the center. And so you're also kind of, it's just a more flexible way. Like you can still show them side by side if you want to, but you can kind of still print them as individual sheets if you want to. It just in terms of the formatting, those are the implications of that export.